הידיים.
גל ברק, אתה מוקם למעלה?
Dames en heren, u kunt allemaal weer gaan zitten. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Chacham Toledano, Kvod Rabbanim, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu and Mrs. Sarah Netanyahu, distinguished members of the Prime Minister's delegation, Your Excellency Ambassador Chaim Divon and Mrs. Linda Divon, Excellencies, parliamentarians and mayors, distinguished guests, friends. 4 weeks ago, upon completing the restoration and rearrangement, this synagogue complex reopened in the presence of Her Majesty Queen of the Netherlands. This magnificent building, inspired by the temple, reminds everybody, here we are and here we will stay. The Synagoge has remained intact since it first came into use in 1675. Countless Torah mantles, limonim, cloths, manuscripts and books reflect an illustrious cultural heritage. These treasures on display in the excavated cellar areas have been in use at service for centuries. In 1892, Ghazan Oeb Brandon described which Sefer Torah mantles and which religious objects and melodies were to be used in each service. Together with the Jewish Historical Museum, we have made our complex accessible and are now able to welcome over 200,000 visitors each year. Your Excellency, when you visited the world's oldest functioning Jewish library, we were impressed by your interest and knowledge. Etz Chaim was established in 1616 as seminary with a library. In 1889, the librarian David Montesinos donated his personal collection of manuscripts, books and prints. Since then, the library has been known as Etz Chaim Library Livraria Montesinos. In 1993, Etz Chaim was listed in the World Register of UNESCO. The reasons were described in part as follows. By integrating without assimilating, Spanish Jews often acted as mediators in acquainting Christian Europe with the scientific achievement of the Islamic world. The Institute trained its students to take up leadership positions in the various Sephardic communities in Europe, America, notably in the Caribbean and New York, and in North Africa. With an educational program that combined a strong Jewish identity and a profound knowledge of its non-Jewish environment, Etz Chaim has made an important contribution to a society in which several religions coexisted peacefully. First and foremost, services have been conducted continuously in the Synagoge according to our traditions for centuries. The only interruption was during the glowing years from 1940 to 1945. Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, During the Second World War, 105,000 Dutch Jews were murdered, the highest rate of all countries in Western Europe. The few who remained felt they had the duty to rebuild the community. They felt a common bond, and the establishment of the State of Israel gave them strength. Today, 66 years later, we are fortunate to have a complete Jewish infrastructure, synagogues, school, a home for the elderly, medical and psychiatric care in the center of the present Jewish life. The former Jewish quarter is an important Jewish center and comprises the Esnoga, the Jewish Historical Museum, and the Hollandse Schouwburg to commemorate the Holocaust. Ties are very close between Israel and the Netherlands. 10,000 Dutch people have settled in Israel, as have an equally large number of Israelis in the Netherlands. Dutch Jews and non-Jews are among the top 5 donors to Israel. Trade is thriving between our countries, totaling approximately 2 billion euros. Mr. and Mrs. Netanyahu, the turnout this evening reveals the solidarity of the Dutch Jewish community with Israel. We are grateful that you have taken the time to share your thoughts with us. Thank you very much.
After this warm welcome, I would like to invite His Excellency Chaim Divon, the Israeli ambassador to the Netherlands, to speak. Mr. Divon has been appointed as ambassador since September last year.
אדוני ראש הממשלה, מר נתניהו, רעיית ראש הממשלה, הגברת שרה נתניהו, שלום וברוכים הבאים. 15 years ago, a Prime Minister of Israel visited the Netherlands, and the Prime Minister then was Mr. Netanyahu and Mrs. Netanyahu. So, in between, there was another private visit, which means that there are very special sentiments of Mr. Netanyahu and Mrs. Netanyahu to the Netherlands. So we hope to see many, many more times your visits to this very special place. So many people wanted to listen to you today, and unfortunately we had to turn them down. There are many, many big halls in Amsterdam which could have hosted thousands of people, but we have chosen this place because this is one of the outstanding treasures of the Jewish people, one of the outstanding treasures of the Jewish community of the Netherlands, one of the outstanding treasures of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And therefore, just last month, Her Majesty the Queen was sitting here on this seat. And today, we have the Prime Minister and Mrs. Netanyahu. What else can we ask for? Prime Minister Netanyahu, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. Mr. Netanyahu.
Toda rabba. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. This is a cold evening and a very warm audience. Thank you all. Thank you, Ambassador Divon. Thank you to the CIDI, to the Portuguese Jewish community, the Central Jewish Board for making this possible. And there are members of parliament here and diplomats, the Vice Mayor of Amsterdam, the distinguished rabbis, Mr. Abavanel, leaders of the Dutch churches, Christian Friends of Israel, and above all, the proud members of the Dutch Jewish community. Ambassador Devon is right. I came here the second time in a formal capacity as finance minister. This was, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. And I heard about this synagogue, but I never visited it. So I said, I want to go see it. And I walked in and I was absolutely amazed. And I said, it's one of the most beautiful synagogues I've ever seen. And they said, well, you haven't seen the best part. And they took me to the back, to the archives, and started showing me material about Spinoza. I was amazed. Talmudic writings, biblical scholarship down the centuries. I was amazed. And I said, well, I have to come back here. So now we have a short visit. It's really almost one day. I said, I want to come back to the synagogue. And I walked in with my wife this time, and we are amazed. And we're delighted to be with you here. It's absolutely spectacular. Nothing short of it. Well, this morning, I began my day in Jerusalem, the eternal and undivided capital of Israel. And now I stand before you in this synagogue in Amsterdam, the beating heart of this country, Holland. Now, the Dutch people and the Jewish people, well, we're both small in size, but great in spirit. And this glorious synagogue bears witness to the triumph of that spirit. It bears witness to the triumph of the spirit of the Jews of Spain and Portugal. Mr. Abravanel, you may not know this, but my father, you may know this. My father wrote a book about Don Isaac Abravanel, the great leader of Spanish Jewry, and he's devoted his life to the scholarship of the history of the Inquisition and the history of the Jews of Spain, and that wondrous society was broken down in one day. And these Jews, who included the greatest geniuses of that time, anywhere on earth, they were expelled. And in the lands that they lived in for 1,000 years, first in Spain, or for many centuries, and in Portugal a few years later, their lives were destroyed. It was the single greatest catastrophe of the Jewish people since the destruction of the temple. And it heralded another great catastrophe in the making. But at the time, it was an enormous breakdown of life. And these Jews, or some of them, came here and they found refuge in this country, and they rebuilt their shattered lives here. And this synagogue, this magnificent synagogue, bears testament to their powers of regeneration. But it also bears witness to the spirit of the Dutch people. They opened their arms to those fleeing religious fanaticism. They let those who escaped their inquisitors begin life anew with religious freedom, with freedom. And as the Jewish community began to be rooted in this land, the Netherlands enjoyed a golden age. It was an age that gave the world Rembrandt, Spinoza, Leeuwenhoek, many others. It was an age of great masters and great thinkers, free thinkers. An age of merchants and mariners, artists and scientists. This tiny nation, Holland, became the envy of the world. Its fame spread far and wide. The fame of a people rooted in biblical values, with a work ethic second to none. The fame of a people who championed liberty and who kept their unique identity while being tolerant of others. And as the Netherlands grew and prospered, so too did the Jewish community. And on the eve of World War II, it numbered 140,000 strong. Hebrew words, Jewish words, made their way into everyday Dutch. You know those words. Mazel. Everyone knows what mazel is. And Holland had a lot of it. And the Jews of Holland had a lot of it, but they were about to run out of luck. Because a new darkness spread over Europe. And Dutch Jewry was decimated. Now that's the wrong word. See, decimated, or decimation, is what the Romans used to do to spread a message of cruelty. They'd kill one man in 10 to decimate a community. But with Dutch Jewry, it's not that 1 in 10 were killed. It's that barely more than 1 in 10 survived. Over 80% of Dutch Jewry perished. And this is one of the highest percentages of any Jewish community in Europe. There were many non-Jewish citizens who stood on the sidelines. There were some who helped the Nazis. But there was also something else. There were many brave Dutch souls who stood up to the Nazi evil. And the record of this Dutch courage, that record stands out as well. The people of Holland can be proud that despite their size, the small size of their population, they have the second highest number of what we in Israel call the righteous Gentiles of any country. There were thousands of righteous Dutch men and women who risked their lives and the lives of their families to save Jews. This is the highest form of courage. You can risk your life. That requires great courage and heroism. But to risk the life of your children and your parents and your relatives to save somebody else, that may be the highest testament of bravery there is. There were men and women like Albertje and Cornelis Oosterlee. I want to tell you about them. The Oosterlees hid a Jew in their home throughout the war, and they helped many other Jews escape to safety. Their son Martin is here tonight. Martin, this is dark, but I want you to recognize him. Can you stand up? Can we see you? There he is. "30 years ago, Martin's daughter Annelies came to Israel. She volunteered in an old age home for Dutch Jews in Israel that is named for Queen Juliana. Annelies followed the footstep of the biblical Ruth, and she decided to raise a Jewish family in Israel. So her 3 children are the great-grandchildren of a righteous family from the Netherlands. And her husband, Colonel Eran Lerman, is here with me tonight because he serves as my Deputy National Security Advisor. Now that's Dutch-Jewish cooperation for you, of the best sort. Eran, stand up, stand up, stand up. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Dutch and Jewish people have stood together in the past, and we stand together today. Israel is inspired by the history of Holland. I've studied it somewhat, and I find some remarkable similarities. This is the history of a small, free people that stood its ground against a great empire and won independence. The history of an entrepreneurial nation whose commercial success was admired throughout the world. And Israel sees itself in much the same way. We've stood our ground against much larger enemies committed to our destruction. We have a remarkable record of innovation and achievement, of high-tech startups and Nobel Prize-winning scientists that per capita is the highest in the world. But we also share, Israel and Holland, some present achievements. Both our countries are weathering a great economic storm. And I can say that so far, by the way, this places a burden on me and my government and on the government of Holland. So far, we've acted responsibly, even when others don't. And I think we have the economic performance to show for it. But I think that on the issues that most concern Israel, on the one issue that most concerns Israel, we also stand together. We stand together in opposing Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran continues its feverish pursuit of nuclear weapons, all the time declaring its intention to wipe Israel off the map. And a nuclear-armed Iran is a threat to Israel, to the region, to the world. Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, period. I want to thank the Dutch government for its firm stand in favor of strong sanctions on Iran. And I believe that those sanctions should be applied on Iran's central bank and on its oil exports, and they should be applied now. Israel and the Netherlands also stand together on the need to advance a secure and genuine peace with the Palestinians. And I want to make clear something that is often obfuscated. Israel places no preconditions on negotiations with the Palestinians. We have positions in the negotiations, but we have no preconditions to start the negotiations. And it's about time we started those negotiations. We've asked to do that for 3 years. We place no preconditions on the start of negotiations, and we cannot end the negotiations unless we begin them. So I've made clear from day one that I'm prepared to meet President Abbas any place, any time, to negotiate peace. And I make that clear again today. I invite him to sit down and negotiate peace for the sake of both our peoples. President Abbas, don't walk away from peace. Continue the negotiations. Now, what's my formula for peace? It can be summed up in a few words. A demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state. The Palestinian state, you can clap, it's fine, you can applaud. This is, there's free speech here, free clapping. There's even heckling, if you want it. Here's why we need a demilitarized state. Because we don't want to repeat the mistakes that were made in Lebanon and Gaza. In both places, Israel left the territory, and as soon as we left the territory, Iran walked in. It walked in with its proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon, its proxy Hamas in Gaza, and then they proceeded to stockpile rockets and missiles and fired roughly 12,000 rockets into Israel, into our cities, into our towns, on our children. Israel is a small country. Holland is a small country. Israel is smaller than Holland. Imagine 12,000 rockets being pelleted on you, and then have in your immediate neighborhood right now a total of about 70,000 rockets, 10,000 in Gaza, 60,000 in Lebanon, pointed on our heads. We have to make sure that doesn't happen a third time. And remember that the Samarian and Judean mountains dominate the country. They're much bigger than Gaza, much, much bigger. And Israel is left with a narrow coastline. And if we have tens of thousands of more rockets, that means that any point in Israel could be reached by rockets that have to traverse 1 minute, 2 minutes flight time. It's a tiny country. Israel is a great country, but it's a small country. And it faces the greatest security threats of any nation on earth. So in any peace treaty, for any peace to endure, to succeed, Israel needs real security agreements on the ground, not paper promises, real security on the ground. That's a prerequisite for peace, and that means a demilitarized Palestinian state. Now, peace will require compromises from both sides, but there's something that I, as the Prime Minister of Israel, will never compromise on. I will never compromise on Israel's security. That's my responsibility, to protect and ensure the Jewish future, the security of the one and only Jewish state. And in the peace treaty, the Palestinians will have to agree to do something that they haven't done for over 63 years. And I know this is against a lot of received opinion, because people don't really understand what this conflict is about. What is it about? Why is it going on? How long is it going on? From 1967? From 1948? No, it's not. It's going on from 1920. That's when the attacks on the Jews, the first attacks on the Jews in Jaffa began from Palestinians. Why did they attack us? Why? There were no settlements. There were no territories. There was a settlement, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jerusalem, Tzfat. Jews have been there for ages in those last cities. Why Why did they attack us? Why did they attack us for nearly half a century, from 1920 till 1967? Why? There weren't any refugees up to 48. After 48, if you asked the Arab world, why are you attacking Israel? They said it's the refugees, but that's the result of their attack on Israel, not its cause. And anyway, we had an equal number of refugees kicked out from Arab lands, and we absorbed them. We didn't make it a perpetual cause for conflict. And after 1967, when you asked them, why is this conflict going on? They said because of your presence in the territories. But there wasn't a single Israeli soldier in Judea and Samaria before 1967, when 3 Arab countries placed a noose around the neck. Again, the technique is to turn the result of Arab aggression into its cause. What is the cause of this conflict? It's the persistent refusal to accept the Jewish state in any boundary. So if peace is to endure, there is a simple requirement, other than security. The Palestinians will have to do something they refuse to do. They still refuse to do today. Amazing. They must, once and for all, recognize the Jewish state. We deeply appreciate the position of the Dutch Parliament on this issue. Last year, it passed a motion making clear that lasting peace requires recognition by the Palestinians of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. I couldn't say it better myself, although it takes me a little more time. But that's it. That's what it's all about. And you can write articles for a year, for a decade, for decades, and not put the finger on this simple truth. But it is the truth, and it should be spoken clearly. A demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state is the formula for peace. And I hope, for our sake, and for the sake of our Palestinian neighbors, for our children and their children, that the Palestinian Authority gets on with it, comes to the table, and negotiates a peace. They'll have their own positions, and I respect the fact that we can differ, but the only way we can resolve those differences is to sit down and talk and argue and finally agree. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel is a beleaguered democracy confronting great threats and great challenges. Yet there are those who cast Israel as a pariah state every time we exercise the inherent right of self-defense. And I can tell you that our soldiers go to unprecedented lengths to keep innocent Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. Yet there are those who shamefully call them war criminals. So I appreciate especially the fact that the Netherlands was one of the handful of countries who refused to participate in this theater of the absurd. The Netherlands stood up and voted at the Human Rights Council against the Goldstone report, and we appreciate that, and we thank the Netherlands for doing something so clear, so simple. Now, mind you, the Human Rights Council had, I think, Gaddafi as chairman. It had Iran, and it's absurd. Yet we were being hauled into this kangaroo court, and our soldiers who risked their lives in order to save civilian lives, ours and our neighbors. They were accused of being war criminals. It's good to know that the government of this country, where the International Criminal Court sits in judgment, they know who the real war criminals are. They're the leaders of Iran who call for a new Holocaust and who vow to wipe Israel off the map. The real war criminals are the terrorists of Hezbollah and Hamas, who fire rockets at civilians and who place their weapons right near schools and hospitals to use innocent people as human shields. These are the real war criminals. And in Holland, there are people who know it. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel and the Netherlands, the Dutch people and the Jewish people must continue to stand together for the sake of truth. I know that this is a difficult battle. It requires leadership. Leadership is tested when people stand and say what is not popular. When they stand against the regnant tide. When you stand up and you say simple things of truth, that's leadership. It's also action. But in its essence, it's to say yes to good things and to say no to bad things. And it's not easy. And I recognize it's sometimes not easy. But the most important thing about leadership, in the face of vilification and criticism, it's to stand up and to say and tell the truth. At the United Nations this past September, I spoke about a meeting I had with the Lubavitcher Rebbe shortly after I came to serve as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. And the Rebbe told me that even in the darkest hall, the light of a single candle can be seen from a great distance. In this remarkable synagogue, you're used to the lighting of candles. Look around you. A lot of candles. Well, I asked the Jews of the Netherlands and the many non-Jewish friends of Israel that inhabit this great land to continue to light candles of truth. Let us work together to ensure that this light can be seen far and wide. Let everyone know of our shared commitment to defend the one and only Jewish state, to secure our common values, and to advance a lasting and secure peace for all. Thank you very much. Toda rabah. Thank you very much. Toda rabah. Thank you.
The Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is leaving. Thank you so much for coming here today. Dames en heren, zou u allemaal willen gaan zitten, alstublieft? Can you please all take your seats, please?